And as we did for the previous study group, I want to start with the 3-minute silent sitting. And let's see if I can make this work. Okie dokie, here we go. So I'm going to begin, try to outline how we're going to do this in terms of each of the evenings. And because this, we really got into the weeds with the Queen Srimala group. 24 ended up being 24 meetings. We're going to try to, the aim is to do this in 8 meetings. So we're going to have to kick through it much faster. And we won't be going word by word or line by line. but we'll be going by sections pretty much. And so as we go, I haven't uploaded my translation yet, but I will within a day or two, basically, and hopefully you'll be able to read at least the section that we're going to be doing for the next week. And let's go here. What's this? That's not right. Okay. This is great. What is going on here? Let's open it again. I don't know what happened to it. It got lost. Oh, this is not an auspicious beginning. Where are we going here? There we go. Okay. This is the what I sent out as the study guide for the group. We'll be meeting starting today through the March 17th, Thursday evenings. I picked this mudra, the Vitarka mudra, as the logo for this study group. It's the hand gesture of teaching and discussion, symbolizing the oral transmission of Buddha's Dharma. And it is performed by lifting the right hand at chest level, making a circle with the tip of the thumb and index finger and the other fingers pointing up. And then the palm of the hand is in the lap in the meditation, half of the meditation mudra. But this mudra is called the wheel of the teaching. That's the finger and thumb make the wheel of the teaching. So this is that this is a drawing of it, and then here it is in a beautiful colored statue there. Okay, so the outline is going to be tonight where I'm going to go over basically the introduction to the treatise, and I'll be talking about the title, where it came from, who wrote it, the controversies about those things, the Chinese translations, and the English translations, and the sort of organizational, the outline of the treatise. Next week, we'll be discussing part 1 and part 2 of the treatise, called Articulating the Causes and Conditions, Articulating the Meanings Set Forth. One interesting thing I'll say right off the bat here is that those, as you remember in the, those of you who are in the Queen Srimala class, there were 15 sections, and sections 4 to 15 all began with this word articulating. And so these 5 parts all begin with the word articulating. And that is one of the connections we'll see between this and the Queen Srimala Sutra. So we'll go through each of the third, it will be part 1 and part 2. Part 3 of the treatise is the giant middle section called Articulating the Explanations. And so we'll go through that you see the first, these ones, these meetings 3, 4, 5, and 6 are all going through section 1, and we don't get to section 2 of part 3 until 6. And then in meeting 7, we'll do the third part, section 3. And then in the last meeting, we'll do the 2 last parts, part 4 and part 5. Part 5 is just a very short one. So basically, in meetings 2 to 8, I've broken up the treatise into equal text bites, equal number of pages to review. And that's what is in the parentheses is the version I was looking at when I broke this up. They're the pages. I've edited it a little bit, so the pages will be a little bit different than these, but basically the same. So today, going to the introduction. Let's go here.
Gregory, a small bit of housekeeping. Do you want me to be co-host to watch the waiting room, or do you want to just kind of manage it yourself?
I have it set up so that anybody can, there's no waiting room. I've disabled the waiting room.
Perfect. Okay, great.
So we'll see who shows up, if anybody at the time when they pop in. Okay, so here's the title page. Oh, can you see the title page? I can't. It doesn't look like it's showing on my screen.
It is. It's just we're seeing you're doing a full screen share rather than the screen share of the tab or the.
Oh, that's weird. Okay, I don't know why it's doing that.
You do the square up top, or yeah, that's another way to do it.
Let me try again. There we go. That looks better from here. Okay, so this is the title page. Treatise on the Great Vehicles Arousing of Faith by Ashwagosha. That's how it, and in one scroll, it can be added there too. Ashwagosha is the putative author. The Sanskrit, reconstructed Sanskrit, is Mahayana Pada Shastra. The Chinese here is the first 2 characters for great vehicle, 3rd character for arousing, 4th character for faith, 5th character for treatise, or discourse. That's the Lun. So Da Shang, Shi Jin, Lun. Now so it comes from the Teisho Tripitaka, and I've taken mine Chinese from the Chinese Buddhist text index. That is the Buddhist canon in a Chinese format. So that's where I got my Chinese text to translate. The text itself says it's translated by Paramartha, and then I'm doing the English translation. I don't know if I want to. Okay, let's go ahead and do this. The There we go. Okay, this is, I just wanted to talk about the organization of the text first, just so I guess to me we'll have a visual presentation. The text is deeply outlined, except the outline, most of this outline is what I've provided. And it'll become clear as we go through it, the logical reasons for doing that. But there are 11, as I've gone through it, there's 11 levels of outlining, because the text is very much, there's this, and there's 3 of these, and then there's this, and there's 6 of these. And so each time it says there's 6 of these, then that creates for each of the 6 another a level. Now, most of the other people who have translated it haven't approached it in this way that I have, but to me, I really want people to understand how broken down this is outline-wise. So there are 5 parts. Each part can have more than 1 or 2 sections. So this is, this is my scheme here. Below the sections, we have Roman numerals, capitals, Arabic numerals, lowercase, parentheses, etc., down to 11 levels. Now, my word program only goes to 9 levels. So these two, level 10 and level 11, don't show up in my table of contents. But here's the table of contents. The title's Treatise on the Great Vehicles, Arousing of Faith in a Single Scroll. There's an opening adoration. There is like a 5 table of contents of the 5 parts. And that's the closest thing we get to a table of contents. And then we have the parts. Now, what I've done here, what you'll see here is in the brackets are the things that I've inserted. So here, the first part says the beginning part articulating the causes and conditions, and I've inserted a 1 in the bracket. So most of these have the brackets, but the text for each section of the outline, I've taken directly from the body of the text in the body. So I'm picking out from what it says the titles for the sections, but I'm not, creating them out of whole cloth. The first part is causes and conditions. It talks about why the treatise was written. The next part is a little interesting thing where it talks about the Dharma and the meaning, the Dharma of the great vehicle, the meaning of the great vehicle. It breaks down 3 kinds of great and the meaning of the vehicle. As I said, this part 3 is articulating the explanations in it. Section 1 is called Revealing the Correct Meaning. And then there's 2 gates of the one mind. And so the one gate is called the gate of the mind's true suchness. That's A. And the gate of the mind's birth and extinction. You could call that the gate of the mind's samsara. That's B. So you see that B is much longer than the A part. Very interesting point here is that if you are familiar with the Bodhidharma's outline of the 2 entrances to the Mahayana, this 2 gates of the one mind is the same configuration as Bodhidharma's outline, entering by principle and entering by practice. And the gate of the mind's true suchness corresponds directly with Bodhidharma's entering by principle, and the gate of the mind's birth and extinction corresponds to Bodhidharma's entering by practice. It's interesting to me to try to speculate which one, who knew what. Did Bodhidharma crib off of the organization of this treatise, or did this treatise somehow relate to Bodhidharma? I actually have more of an idea that Bodhidharma and the treatise have like a common source of foundation that Bodhidharma may have been referring to in the way that he approached speaking about these things, which is not in this, as the treatise does, very broke down into very specific things. Bodhidharma, of course, is more general and is even more of a synopsis than all of this. So, but it's very clear. We'll find Bodhidharma and Paramartha were contemporaries. So it's very interesting to speculate about what kind of connection they may have had, since the organization of their two outlines have such a common skeleton.
Gregory, for those who don't know the connection to it, what's entry by suchness versus entry by practice?
No principle. Entry by suchness correlates to entry by principle. Entry by birth and death, or through by samsara, corresponds to entry by practice. Okay.
Could you put a little meat on the bones for those?
I don't want to go too far afield, but entry by suchness, or entry by principle, is directly entering by mind, turning the light around and having a direct entry through awareness. The other is entering by practice, entering by the gate of birth and death, the gate of samsara, is doing things as method and practice. And so Bodhidharma picks up the paramitas is one of the entries, one of the practices, karma, accepting karma is another of the practices. So those are the things that happen in our mundane world. So that's the difference. One is, well, I don't want to get too picky about it, but transcending the mundane world, and the other is working in the mundane world. They both arrive at the same place. So that'll come out when we get to that section in the treatise. Just trying to point out here where we're going. Part 4 talks about faith in mind and cultivating practice. And what's interesting is here also is another way where we hear about faith in the way that the Sutra of Queen Srimala's Lion Roar talked about. This section 3 of part 4 is a direct continuation of the discussion of faith as the third kind of the true. Remember, there were 3 kinds of true children of the Tathagata in the Queen Srimala Sutra, and the third category for the true children of the Tathagata were those who recollected the Buddha with faith. And that's what this section 3 is about. So it's very clear, again, this is another one of the clear stamps that this treatise relies on, in large part, on Queen Srimala Sutra. And then there's this very short section about just trying to, it's a pump up, it's that kind of pump it up, and sort of the last thing the coach says before getting out on the football field, kind of a little section. So I just want to do that to show the various sections. Now, we've got here we go. I'm going to jump now to the various, just to see what's happened. We've got these various English translations. And let's see here. We don't need. Get that ribbon to go away, but I don't see. Tabs over. There we go. Okay, this is D.T. Suzuki's translation. 1900. This was the first thing he translated that went into print. And Ashwagosha's discourse on the awakening of faith in the Mahayana, translated by D.T. Suzuki. So he used, for Shastra, he translated it as discourse instead of treatise. And I think this treatise is kind of half and half. A discourse, in my mind, is more question and answer format, which is a traditional format of the treatises. But since this treatise does have some question and answer sections in it, but overall, because it's so tightly organized in the outline format that I showed, I translate it as a treatise rather than a discourse. Now here in his title, Awakening of Faith in the Mahayana, I think this was the saddest thing that Suzuki did with his translation, was translated as Faith in the Mahayana, because I'll be talking about it. As I read it, it's not faith in the Mahayana, it's faith in mind. And mind is equated with the true suchness, the one Dharmakaya, the one Dharmadhatu. Those are all words for what the faith is directed toward. So I really think it was a sort of set us off down the wrong path. The other thing is, and I posted some of the one of the translations by Suzuki. Something he did which was interesting was it was his first thing. He was a young guy, relatively speaking, and wanted to kind of show his chops at understanding Western culture. And in so doing so, he kind of didn't understand Western culture, because he translated the word mind as soul, and because he wanted to make it accessible to a Christian-oriented culture. Very fascinating. So there's a lot of oddities to his translation, although his translation has a lot of great footnotes, and it shows Chinese characters and how he translates them and things like that. But overall, it's a very dissatisfying translation. And in fact, Suzuki, in his studies in the Lankavatara Sutra, said that he wanted to, because in his studies for the Lankavatara Sutra, he wrote over 30 years later from this one in 1933 about, and he said that he was dissatisfied with this translation, and he wanted to do, re-edit it and rewrite it, the translation, update it, but he unfortunately never got around to doing that. The next one is really interesting historically, 1907, so it's 7 years after Suzuki, by this guy named Timothy Richard. The Awakening of Faith in the Mahayana Doctrine. So he adds the word doctrine to it. And he calls Mahayana Buddhism the new Buddhism, by the patriarch Ashwagosha. Now this is a totally goofy translation, because he took Suzuki's attempt to make it accessible to the then current Western culture, and he just carried that to the extreme. And he basically translated it as if it was a Christian document from the Greek or Aramaic or something. It is really goofy, full of Christian stuff. But I posted it, and you should have all got a copy of it in one of the emails I sent. If you want to look into see how really goofy that is. The next one is from Dwight Goddard, 1938, in the Buddhist Bible, and of course he was working off of Suzuki, but this one was specifically translated with Bixu Waitao, W-A-I-T-A-O. This one is also, Hakeda mentions this in his introduction, and I agree with it, that Goddard's translation is too free, and he picks and chooses bits out of the treatise. He doesn't translate the whole treatise. He picks and chooses bits out of it. And then it is really so difficult to compare his translation to many of the others, because the flow of it is not the same, because it jumps, because he's cut out sections, it jumps, and you're not exactly sure where it jumps to. And as I said, it's just very loose. So I don't recommend that. The next one we got to is the one that most people know, Hakeda, The Awakening of Faith, 1967, the good old years. So here you notice he's dropped off in the Mahayana. He's kind of caught on to the fact that of the problem with calling it Awakening of Faith in the Mahayana. So he just leaves the word Mahayana off the title. He has a good translation. I don't get too nitpicky about it. But there are things I do want to nitpick. He says in his own in one of his own footnotes that the term is true suchness. Literally, it's written as true suchness or real suchness, which is either one is valid. But he says he is going to translate it as just suchness. So I don't know if he's trying to save ink or what, but it doesn't make any sense to me to admit that what the original says true suchness or real suchness, but you're just going to translate it as suchness. Doesn't make any sense to me. Up to this point in time, though, of course, this was the best translation. He has good notes, and he has his own commentary, which, I agree with in part and disagree with in part, but it's good commentary. My approach to all these scholars and translators, of course, is to receive them all and then chew on them and say that works and this doesn't. Not everybody can do that, so most of us are just stuck with the translation that we get and don't have the time to compare translations and things. But that's partly why I wanted to do this translation, was because I'm chewing on all these other translations and going back to the original Chinese. The other thing that he does that I don't like, and just as a general rule with all translators, brackets are inserted if the translator thinks something isn't clear and it needs to be added. Like sometimes it'll say the treatise says, and so they'll insert the brackets naming the treatise, or the sutra says, and they'll insert in brackets Lankavatar to let you know which sutra. I have no problem with that kind of use of brackets. But other times the brackets are used to tell you what the translator thinks the sentence means. And when they do that, they're skewing and biasing the reader. Obviously, they're doing it because they feel that helps the reader. But I think it shouldn't be in brackets in the text. It should be in a footnote. When I read these things, I end up drawing a line through all these things in brackets so my eye doesn't get trapped by the brackets, because I want to read the material for what it says, not for what the translator is telling me what it says. And Hakeda is one of the guys who uses way too many brackets, in my mind, in my view. This is the most recent one, 2019, and basically these guys beat me to the punch because I've been working on mine for like 5 or 6 years. But of course, now go look at here. They've titled it Treatise on Awakening Mahayana Faith. This is ambiguous, but I think it's not wholly wrong. It's not as bad as faith in the Mahayana. But it's ambiguous. Faith, what do they mean by Mahayana faith? I'm going to get into more detail about that. So let's go into that right now. Basically, we go back to the title. Mahayana Stratopada Shastra. The question is, what about the order of these of this? You got a Sanskrit syntax and you got a Chinese syntax. How do you translate that? There was a writer, an academic, pretty good guy, named Sung-Bae Park. He wrote a book called Buddhist Faith and Sudden Enlightenment, and he also wrote some papers. He's a modern guy. I don't remember when he wrote this, but at some point he wrote out his argument why the correct title should be Awakening of Mahayana Faith, not Awakening of Faith in the Mahayana. Now, this is written by Charles Mueller in his essay, Wan Ho's Reliance on the Hui Yuan, in his exposition of the two hindrances. Hui Ran was another treatise guy, and both Wan Hyo and Hui Ran wrote commentaries on this treatise, The Awakening or Arousing of Faith. Actually, Hakeda did not call it Awakening of Faith in Mahayana. He just called it Awakening of Faith. So this should actually say Suzuki. So there's this argument that the syntax, where's the subject? And the subject is not Mahayana. So he said, or the noun. He says Mahayana should not be interpreted as the noun object, but as a modifier, which characterizes the type of faith. Now, I agree that the Mahayana is a modifier, but I don't believe it characterizes the type of faith per se. I say it characterizes the type of arousing of faith. So it goes down to, do we see it as Mahayana Stratopada Shastra or Mahayana Pada Shradot Shastra, which is so if you went by the Sanskrit syntax, it would be Great Vehicle Faith Arousing Treatise. But the Chinese syntax puts it the other way around, Great Vehicle Arousing Faith Treatise. Either way, that's why I see it as the Great Vehicle modifies the arousing, not the faith. So I'm not going to go into the word for word here, but that there's a place later on in the treatise where it talks about the correct Mahayana faith. So again, that's another reason for showing it's not the faith in the Mahayana. Now, just to lay it on thick here, the treatise has many references to faith. And so I'm going to talk about, here are some of the examples. From the table of contents, the title of part 4, that which is fourth is the part of faith in mind and cultivating practice. Right there it says faith in mind and cultivating practice. From the list of the 8 causes and conditions for writing the treatise, number 4 is that which is fourth is because it is for inducing the multitude of beings with slight good roots to cultivate the habit of faith in mind. That which is 7th, because it's for revealing the skillful means of single-pointed recollection. That word recollection is often mindfulness. Single-pointed recollection to be born in front of the Buddha and necessarily be firmly settled and not backsliding from faith in the mind. So that was what we were talking about earlier. From part 3, by one's own faith in self-nature. And then a little later on it says one's own nature is true suchness. And a little later on, it says, the own nature of the multitude of beings is the clear and pure mind. So when it says faith in self-nature, it's saying faith in true suchness, faith in pure mind. Deep faith in the Dharma of true suchness. And there's a line that says, because there is only the one mind, it is called true suchness. So the Dharma of true suchness is a synonym for the Dharma of the one mind. It has, there's a line, perfecting of faith to initiate mind, bearing offerings and cultivating and practicing faith in the mind to perfect faith in the mind. Thus is faith in the mind perfected. From part 4, when articulating faith in mind, in outline, one can articulate 4 kinds of faith in mind. Cultivate practice of faith in mind, attaining entry to the samadhi of true suchness, and by deeply subduing afflictions, their faith in mind increases far and wide. They dread the designation that faith in mind can be arduous to accomplish. Know that the Tathagata has superior skills to lay hold of and protect faith in mind. So we can see from all these examples from the text itself, quoting from the text itself, that this is about faith in mind. And it's one of my, it's another of my nitpicking, perhaps if you want to minimize it, are great outrages. That has not been the focus, that Suzuki set it on the path, faith in Mahayana. And we have all these references to it being faith in the Mahayana, faith in that, and not faith in our own mind and our own nature of true suchness of mind. This is an example of that. I think Carol might have been talking to me, but I didn't hear what she said. Okay, I want to compare 2 lines. Okay, I forgot to mention this. We'll go to this. There are 2 Chinese translations. One is by Paramartha, and the other is Siksananda. Paramartha translated his about 553 in the current era, Common Era. Siksananda translated his around 710, about 150 years later. Before that, there's a reference to the first translation being at 405, but it's been lost and nobody knows who did it. There was just some reference to it, and it's been lost about who did it and or where it went. So there's only 2 extant Chinese translations. There's no extant Sanskrit translation. Although there is a reference in a work saying that there was a Sanskrit translation known in the 8th century, at the beginning of the 8th century, which is when Siksananda did his translation. So that's probably a reference to the Sanskrit that Siksananda was using. There's a controversy about the Sanskrit, and we'll get to that. But before that, I want to go a little bit backwards to this question of translating the Chinese characters. You see the yellow here and the blue. The yellow is faith, mind. The blue are the differences, just differences between the two translations, that they have different wording. In the Paramartha's translation has a little bit different wording than Siksananda's translation, but you can see most of it's the same, but just a couple of differences. But both of them have faith, mind. But look how it gets translated. So here I got a fourth, that which acts to induce good roots that are minute in the multitude of beings, cultivate habit, faith, mind, because. If you know Star Wars and how Yoda speaks, this is how Yoda speaks. This is how they figured out how to do the syntax for Yoda. They kind of took it off of Chinese syntax. Siksananda puts in this concept, non-backsliding, to reach non-backsliding. This is an example of why I prefer Paramartha, because this to me seems clearly an insertion by Siksananda to make it more related to the 10 stages of the Bodhisattva practice. Siksananda was working at a time where Paramartha was just trying to give it to the people, and Siksananda was trying to make it to the literati translation that was very elegant to the royal court. But here's the different translations. Suzuki, that he might enable those whose roots of merit is weak and insignificant to acquire faith and to advance to the stage of immovable firmness. That immovable firmness is the Siksananda version. But see here, I've got it in yellow. He just has faith. He doesn't have faith in mind, which is in both of those sentences right here, faith in mind. So that's my peeves against these kinds of translations. This Timothy Richard one, it is to enable those in whom the root of goodness is very small to cultivate faith more and more. This one is not such a goofy sentence, but you see again, he leaves out faith in mind. Dwight Goddard, the fourth reason was to awaken and strengthen the faith of beginners on the path and to encourage them to a more earnest practice. So you can see how that's kind of that's gone off the side. But again, he doesn't have faith in mind. Hakeda, the fourth reason is to encourage those whose capacity for goodness is still slight to cultivate the faithful mind. Well, at least he has the word mind in there. There's no reason to translate it as faithful mind here, and later on in the sutra, he actually, in some of those other sections, he translates it as faith in mind, but at least he has mind here. Going now, the next one, the one by the more recent one, I have JLMS because it's actually by four. I forgot to point out that it's 4 academics collaborated for that translation. Theirs is, the fourth is to cause sentient beings of few virtuous roots to cultivate a commitment to faith. So they've backslid and left out mind again. So of all of these, Hakeda is the one I consider to be the best, because at least he has the word mind in there. Although he has capacity for goodness rather than virtuous roots. What, Mike?
Is that because of a lack of kind of like the kind of dharmic eye and the kind of understanding of where this treatise falls in kind of explicating the Dharma on a bigger level? You know, you have those tiers you talk about, or is that just from lack of seeing the text for what it is?
I think it's because these people, especially with this one, with where are they? Jorgensen, Lusthaus, Makem, and Strange. John Jorgensen, Dan Lusthaus, John Makem, and Mark Strange. In this version, they are really going academic full hog. And I think that's the problem. They're more interested in making it simple for the non-academic reader and using footnotes for the academic reader. And of course this is speculation on my part, but I'm seeing that they think if they say it conflicts with their idea of its faith in the Mahayana if they say faith in mind, and they don't know how to deal with this repetition of faith in mind. That's the way I look at it. Is they just would rather not discuss it and pretend like the word mind isn't in the sentence.
In a certain way, there's really no way to academically encapsulate mind in a context, and so decontextualize it. It feels hard to come up with something.
I don't know.
Knowing the kind of the dharmic truth under mind, it has more of an aliveness in it.
Well, to me, you lose the point if you just talk about commitment to faith. Faith in what? There's a lot of things, and so this sutra is all about the faith in what. But if you boil down the whole treatise, I said this sutra, I meant this treatise. If you boil down this whole treatise to one word, it's that one word mind. That's the point that that if they don't have the word mind in there, that's what they're missing. The whole treatise can be boiled down to the one word, mind. And all the various things about that. And as we go through the treatise, we'll be talking about, how that word mind can be used in so many different ways. But here it has all these synonyms for it. The one Dharma Dhatu, true suchness, and whatnot.
How does that relate to the kind of one mind or school, mind only school?
Well, that's what it is. That's exactly what it is. So we'll get there, but that's what it is. This treatise is a treatise of the mind-only school, which includes the Lankavatara, Queen Srimala, the Nirvana Sutra, and all of basically it's the Ekayana Sutras. And sometimes it's called the one vehicle, sometimes it's called the mind-only, sometimes it's called the Buddha mind school, sometimes it's called the Dharma nature school, as opposed to the Dharma characteristics school. They're all synonyms for this mind is Buddha teaching. And Buddha is suchness and suchness is mind. So my translation of these two sentences both are, that which is fourth is because it is for inducing the multitude of beings with slight good roots to cultivate the habit of faith in mind. Fourth is because it is for inducing the multitude of beings with slight good roots to initiate faith in mind to reach non-backsliding. Either way, the word faith in mind is there. And as we know in our Zen thing, we have the great verse poem that we call the Sing Sing Ming, faith in mind, the inscription on faith in mind. And you see that same two characters is translated a lot of different ways. Trust in mind, trust mind, believing in mind, believing mind, faith in mind, faith in mind, trusting in mind, trust in the heart, trust in the heart, trust in the heart. So there's all these different ways of translating those two characters, but all of them have either faith or trust and mind or heart. So to me, anything that doesn't translate those two characters with either of those combinations of words is a failure of translation. And so perhaps I'm too snooty, perhaps not, but I think that's just a totally important aspect to the translation. So that when I see that the mind part aspect, the faith and mind part is left out, I go, whoa, no, this has to be corrected. And I get on my Crusader Rabbit, put on my Crusader Rabbit helmet and pick up my Don Quixote lance. Okay. Just to go to a little more context, culturally, historically, the treatise is recognized by every scholar. If you look at every introduction to all the books written, and you look at various commentaries about it and everything, this treatise was a big deal. From the time that Paramartha translated it in the middle of the 6th century, 553, all the way through to the Song dynasty, Chan of the 13th century, the treatise was considered an outline of the Mahayana, or an outline of the core teachings or ideas of the Mahayana. So Wonderwheel, the great Dharma master of Korea, in his treatise on his commentary on the treatise, said it's the text that posits and negates freely, being the ancestral source of all treatises and the chief arbiter of all controversies. Wonderwheel was a very interesting guy. He took the Ekayana seriously as the principle for harmonization. And in his treatise, his commentary on the treatise, he uses the concept of the one mind, which is what this treatise begins with, as seriously as if you say that the Mahayana is faith in the one mind, that in itself is the anchor, the source, the pivot, the measure, the rule, the litmus test, whatever you want to say, for harmonizing all the apparent disparities in Buddhism. Why we have all these different kinds of forms of Buddhism and everything. He said, if we focus on the fact that it's all the one mind, that Buddha's awakening is awakening to his own true nature, his own true self, his own one mind, is the one mind of true suchness, then it's all can be harmonized if we come at it from that perspective. If we try to do lesser goals or lesser aims for Buddhism, the Buddha Dharma, that's where we get caught up in the disputes and controversies. And he said, this treatise is the chief arbiter for all such controversies. Charles Mueller, in discussing, who was focuses on Wonderwheel primarily in his academic studies, he said Wonderwheel's emphasis on the treatise, in commenting on his Wonderwheel's emphasis on this treatise, he says, these developments in the Srimala Sutra, the Lankavatara Sutra, and the Ratnagotra Vibhaga, that's a Shastra, are followed both historically and doctrinally by the awakening of Mahayana faith, which assembles the most important concepts from both the Yogacara and Tathagatagarbha traditions in a single tightly argued fascicle. Now, he uses the word Tathagatagarbha there, and as I've said before in our Queen Srimala class, Tathagatagarbha is one aspect of the one vehicle. So I don't like calling it the Tathagata tradition. I like calling it the one vehicle tradition. I prefer that. It's also Wan Ho also called it the Dharma nature tradition rather than the Tathagata tradition, because it's a tradition that focuses on the Dharmakaya, the Dharma Dhatu, true suchness, Buddha nature, Tathagata as all of those as names from various points of view of what it is we're dealing with, which is the Dharma nature, our own nature. So it's been said that actually Shingon, Huayin, Chan, Tendai, Pure Land, and Yogacara all have been influenced by the this treatise on the arousing of faith. So who wrote it? Controversy. When? Yes.
You off onto that, can I ask a point on the faith in mind? There's a koan that's been kind of chewing in me as we've talked. It's that one where Huineng walks with the monks and walks up to the monks and they're arguing, is the flag moving or is the wind moving? And Huineng's response is, it's not the flag or the wind, it's mind that moves. This feels like it's aiming at the same essence. Am I grokking that appropriately?
Oh, I'd say, yeah, exactly. That's a perfect koan for this sense of it's mind. It's not some objective thing. The Dharma Dhatu is a word we'll get to more later, but the Dharma Dhatu is sometimes translated as the cosmos or the universe. What it means is the realm of the Dharma. The Dharma in that sense is what we might call the pattern of everything. But it's all mind, and that's what this treatise focuses on, and that's what Huineng was pointing to in a very fun and practical way there with those two guys. He's saying it's mind, and so that is the mind only, the Buddha mind teaching, and the teaching of this treatise. Yes. Ashwagosha is the putative, purported author of the treatise, but I think we have to basically admit that no, Ashwagosha didn't write this, except in the sense that whoever wrote it is using Ashwagosha as what they call the prestige name, is what the scholarly people call it, an honor name, a prestige name. And this happens in Buddhism a lot, and it also happens in Christianity a lot and other religions, where something is written and a previously famous person name is put on it. This isn't done in the sense of plagiarism or anything in that sense. It's done with the idea that of honor, that we think we're speaking in the way that this person has taught us.
Like the book John was not probably written by John or anything.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. That's the same sort of exactly. That's the same sort of issue that gets raised in Christianity when they talk about that. I've got this book here, Buddhist Monks and Monasteries in India, by Sukumar Dut. He goes through an analysis of Ashwagosha and says if we look at it historically, there were at least 3 Ashwagoshas. The third one being the one attributed to this treatise. The first Ashwagosha is known as the great poet who wrote the Buddha Karika, the life of the Buddha, in a long, wonderful poem that Arnold translated into The Light of Asia. I don't know if you've ever seen that book, but it's a very cool, poetic English translation of that poem of the life of Buddha.
Gandhi talks about in his autobiography. Talks
Who?
about Gandhi in his
Oh,
autobiography.
Gandhi, right? Yeah. So I don't worry about who wrote it. Some guy, or even it could have been a committee, could have been 2, 3, 4 guys in their Buddhist vihara in deep meditation, saying, let's put this together. Some people want to say it was Paramartha himself. I don't believe that. I don't think when Paramartha did write things on his own, which he did put his own name onto. So I don't see there's, and he did write things that were translations that he said were translations. So I don't believe that he created the Sanskrit for this, that he was translating. But because the Sanskrit is lost, and it was, go ahead. And it was lost. It was lost before the 8th century. It never made it to Tibet. So there is no Tibetan translation. And so because there's no Tibetan translation and because there's no Sanskrit left over, some people have said it's a Chinese apocrypha. I don't buy that. Siksananda, 150 years later, had another, he was from the western Khotan region, and he had a Sanskrit version. And there's a discussion about whether this Sanskrit version was actually written by Xuanzang, because when he went to India, he brought a Chinese version of it, and they said that they were interested in it. Nobody could identify a Sanskrit version, so they said that he translated it back into Sanskrit, and that Sanskrit version must have been what Siksananda had and used as his translation. It's a possible story. The narrative is probable or possible. It would also explain to me why there was that silly thing in that one sentence I pointed out earlier, where the Siksananda version adds the non-backsliding section. That's exactly the kind of thing Xuanzang would do when he would translate. So that's very possible that was added not by Siksananda but by Xuanzang. But either way, I don't think that takes away the point that I personally trust Paramartha to have been using a Sanskrit. Additionally, there are people who will even challenge whether Paramartha was the translator and that his name was used as a prestige name by somebody else who actually wrote it in Chinese and double prestige named it. Prestige named it as Ashvaghosha as the writer and Paramartha as the translator. I don't buy that either. It just seems like that idea kind of came later on the back of it. Be that as it may, in Dogen's fascicle called Turning the Wheel of Dharma, he points out something which I think is very appropriate, related to the fascicles called Tenboren, on Turning the Wheel of the Dharma. He points out that his teacher, who he called the old Buddha of Tendo, quoted when someone gives rise to truth by returning to the source, the whole of space and all the 10 quarters falls away and vanishes. That's a line from the Surangama Sutra. And then he said that his master also said, he quoted how other people, other Zen masters, use the first part of the line saying, when someone gives rise to the truth by returning to the source, and then they add a second phrase, instead of the whole of space and all the 10 quarters falls away, one person said, he will keep bumping up against the space and all the 10 quarters. Another Zen master said, for him, the whole of space and the 10 quarters will simply be for him the whole of space and the 10 quarters. And another Zen master said, he will embellish the whole of space and the 10 quarters with his brocade flowerings. And Dogen said, and he added his version of it would be, the whole of space and the 10 quarters gives rise to truth by returning to the source. And then Dogen goes on to say the point here. He says, people say this is from the Shurangama Sutra, and the Shurangama Sutra is alleged to be apocryphal, a forgery. And Dogen goes on to say, this is the Shasta Abbey translation. There are older translations and there are newer translations, but the one considered spurious is the doubtful translation made during the Chinese Shenghuan era. Be that as it may, the Venerable Abbot Gosho Homan, the Venerable Abbot Busho Hotai, and my late master, the old Buddha of Tindao, have just now recommended this verse. So this verse has already been set in motion by the wheel of Dharma of the Buddhas and ancestors. It is the turning of the wheel of their Dharma wheel. As a result, this verse has already set them in motion. It has already given voice to them because it is set in motion by them and sets them in motion. Even were the scripture a spurious one, if they continue to offer its turning, then it is a genuine scripture of the Buddhas and ancestors, as well as the Dharma wheel intimately associated with them. For instance, even tiles and stones, even yellow leaves, even ulambara blossoms, even robes of gold brocade, once they have been held aloft by a Buddha or an ancestor, they become the Dharma wheel of the Buddha. And I think that really, to me, sets aside all the sort of questions about whether this was an apocryphal treatise, whether it came from India sources or not. The Zen masters, Zongmi, Huangbo, so many others have all acknowledged and used this treatise almost verbatim. And so it is now, according to Dogen's perspective, and the one that I adopt too, I readily accept, is that it also has been, has risen above any claim that it's some kind of a, not the word of the Buddha or not a Shastra clearly on the word of the Buddha. Okay, when was it written? We're sort of running out of time. I have to speed up here. When was it written? If it was written by the first Ashvaghosha, that would have been in the 1st century, early 2nd century. Clearly, none of us believe that because the content of it is so obviously based on the Lankavatara Sutra. And as we know, the Lankavatara Sutra itself mentions Queen Srimala Sutra. So we know the Lankavatara Sutra is also based on Queen Srimala Sutra. So we know that it was written sometime after the Lankavatara Sutra was written. The Lankavatara Sutra was written in the 4th century. That's the 300s. Sometime in the 300s is the best guess. And as I said before, there's a notation that the first translation of this treatise was at the beginning of the 5th century. So that makes sense that it appeared somehow, sometime in the end of it was written sometime in the end of the 4th century or very beginning of the 5th century. That is sometime between 450, excuse me, sometime between 350 and 405 is a best guess when it was written.
So maybe written out maybe 100, 200 years before Bodhidharma.
Yes, and Paramartha. Now, Paramartha, he's, as I said, he was a contemporary of Bodhidharma. He came to China at the request of one of the Chinese emperors at the time, and the king of the region that was where Paramartha had as his base said he was a great scholar monk, so he sent him to China. Paramartha wasn't real happy about that, but he went. And there's a whole lot of interesting stuff about his life story that we won't get into, but it's worth looking up because he was reluctant. And as soon as he got here, about 3 years later, that emperor died that brought him there. And then there was all these civil wars, and he had to flee to the south, and there was all kinds of political turmoil and stuff. And he wanted to go back to China. He tried to go back to China almost twice. One time the ship he was on hit a storm and returned him back to Canton. So he never made it out of China, and he died in China, but it's a fascinating story. There are a lot of commentaries on this treatise. Tanyan, in some sources, they say there's up to 300 commentaries, Chinese commentaries, written on this treatise. None in Tibet, because Tibetans didn't know about this treatise. But Chinese, it made such a big splash and was so important that there was up to 300. You'll find different, Hakeda mentions 170 commentaries. But then the later one from 2019, they've counted up to 300 commentaries. There are 5 that are considered the primary ones by Tanyan, that's the earliest one, Huiguan, Wan Hyo was the fellow I mentioned, Fazang, and Zongmi. Zongmi, as many of you know, is my favorite Zen master. In a sense, he's in the top tier, with Lin Chi and Zongmi and Matsu. So Fazang's was written after Wan Hyo, and there's a controversy between Wan Hyo's version and Fazang's version. And the fellow I mentioned earlier, Sungbae Park, Korean, he said that Fazang, he didn't like Fazang's commentary because Fazang puts the whole treatise into a subject-object relationship. And the whole point of the treatise is to get out of the subject-object relationship. And Park said Wan Hyo recognized that. But Suzuki, I think it was, I forget who it was that mentioned that, Suzuki, Fazang's commentary became so popular that more people wrote about Fazang's commentary than went back to the original treatise. So that created, in my mind, some problems. Zongmi, who was, he was born 70 years after Fazang died. Fazang was a great Huayan ancestor. Zongmi Fazang was considered to be the 3rd ancestor of the Huayan tradition. Zongmi was considered to be the 5th ancestor of the Huayan tradition, as well as being a lineage holder in the Shenhui lineage of Zen. His treatise corrected the Fazang, where Fazang had developed this whole system about what they call the Panchao, the taxonomy of the teachings. Zongmi edited Fazang's taxonomy and making it that clear. And he did it strictly, not strictly, explicitly acknowledged that he was rewriting it based on this treatise. That Fazang misunderstood this treatise, and Zongmi's understanding of this treatise said that the highest teaching was the teaching of revealing or manifesting the nature. That was how he put it. And he called that the one vehicle teaching of manifesting the nature. And so that's what we've been talking about, all of this, the Dharma nature school, the Buddha mind school, the Ekayana one vehicles tradition. Zongmi is the Zen master that I follow most strictly in terms of that orientation, that this treatise is a one vehicle treatise, even though it doesn't explicitly use the words one vehicle. It uses the term great vehicle, but as we learned in the Queen Srimala, it's great vehicle in the sense of the one vehicle, not great vehicle in the sense of the three vehicles. That's an important, essential point to understand, going back to the title, the Mahayana Stratotpada Shastra, the Great Vehicle Arousing Faith Treatise, or as I reorder the syntax, the treatise on the great vehicles arousing of faith. That great vehicle that we're talking about is not the three vehicles, which is the two vehicles, and the third vehicle, which is the Bodhisattva vehicle. It's the great vehicle, which includes all the vehicles, and is called the Buddha vehicle.
So the two vehicles that you haven't mentioned besides Bodhisattva would be Mahayana and Hinayana?
No. Hinayana is the term that means the two vehicles, the lesser vehicles. And that's the vehicle of the listener disciples and the vehicle of the Pratyeka Buddhas, or the independently developed Buddhas, people who have awakening experiences on their own, not as a disciple of a teacher. So those two, the disciples and the Pratyeka Buddhas, are considered the two vehicles. And that is sometimes called, by the people who put the great vehicle on a pedestal of elitism, they call those two vehicles the Hinayana, the lesser vehicles.
Oh, I'm sorry, didn't mean to do that.
But the one vehicle form of great vehicle doesn't really call them the lesser vehicles. It calls them the two vehicles, in distinction to the third vehicle, which is the Bodhisattva vehicle. But it doesn't, but it includes all three as the Buddha vehicle. Because everybody, the whole point of having a vehicle is to become a Buddha. And how do you become a Buddha? Point directly to mind, point directly to nature. So the last thing I'm going to say in terms of the points here, let me just run down a couple of quickies. The fellow Sukawar Dut earlier said something interesting. He said, one of the chief titles to distinction is that the treatise gives the first explicit formulation of the Trikeya doctrine, the three bodies. Suzuki said the 3 points, the three gists of the treatise are the conception of suchness, the theory of the triple personality, the Trikeya, and the salvation by faith. On Paramartha, Dut wrote something I think is interesting, and I'll just, he said, in the forefront of the monk scholars of India, 3 illustrious monks of unquestioned preeminence, held by the Chinese Buddhist in the highest veneration are Kumarajiva of the 5th century, Paramartha of the 6th century, and Bodhidharma of the 6th century, of whom the first two were undoubtedly highly accomplished scholars. He says in the 5 centuries of the monk scholars from India coming to China during the Sino-Indian cultural intercourse, the names of these three stand indisputably highest in Chinese estimation. So I think the point there is that we know in the Zen school, the Zen lineages are high veneration and estimation of Bodhidharma, but that Paramartha is on the par with Bodhidharma and Kumarjiva in terms of the scholars who came, the monks who came from India and had an effect in China. So there, we've run out of time, and that's pretty much the presentation of the introduction. Is there any introductory points or questions that people have for clarification? Okay, I did post or share this chart I made. This is something I made for the Queen Srimala class, and I think it's worthwhile looking at if you want to really get into the nitty-gritty of this treatise. It's the hallmarks of the one vehicle. I thought I had it open, but now I can't see where it is. Oh, I see what happened. Oh, here. Okay. Oh, what happened? Okay. It is here. Okay, can you see it now? What I've called outline of hallmarks of the one vehicle. I've got 23 items listed here. You can call them a symptom list for diagnosing whether this is the one vehicle or not. So I'm not going to go through them now, but I'm just going to, maybe I'll point to them now and again when the various points come up, and as we go over the translation, you end up just ticking off the boxes, and that is how we can feel very confident that this treatise is in the one vehicle treatise, as some people call it. Within it, they call it the Tathagata Garbha tradition or movement or school, but I call it the one vehicle school because that it talks about the Tathagata Garbha is one of the points that makes it a one vehicle treatise, not the other way around.
I just wanted to say thank you for your practice and your diligence and rigor with which you know it. It's really deepened me a lot, and I'm grateful for it. I know I'm going to be chewing on this class all week. Thank you so much.
So in the best of worlds, in the next probably on Saturday, I'll get out at least the section that we're going to be discussing next week, the adoration section, and part 1 and part 2, why the treatise was written, and the sort of the general a gem or a little pearl that comes in part 2 about what the treatise is about. Okay.
Thanks a lot, Gregory.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate it. I missed some, but I'm sure it'll be in the recording, so I'll get it.
Mike is.
get off.
Go ahead. Yeah, thanks. Mike has put a bunch of stuff in the chat, which is,
Yeah, I've been
if you want to,
clicking on it.
save, if you want to, at the bottom, if you have your chat open at the bottom, there's 3 dots on the lower right-hand side. If you click on that, it'll say save chat at the top of the pop-up menu. You save chat and it'll save it for you to come back to later.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Lastly, I want to give special thanks to, I'm pointing to you on the page there, Mike, for helping me